AITA for refusing to pay for my brother's wedding even though I can afford it? Money changes people. I never wanted to believe it, but once I started making good money, I saw firsthand how it affects the way people treat you. I wasn't born into wealth. In fact, my childhood was filled with financial struggles. I worked my ass off for everything I have now. While other kids were out enjoying their weekends, I was picking up extra shifts. While my friends were partying in college, I was balancing 3 side jobs just to afford tuition and rent. It was exhausting, lonely, and at times, it felt completely unfair. But I never stopped grinding. After years of hustling, I finally made it. I landed a great job, made smart investments, and eventually, I got to a place where I could breathe, where money wasn't a constant worry anymore. I wasn't filthy rich, but I was comfortable. I had savings, a solid career, and I could afford things I once only dreamed about. That's when the requests started coming in. At first, they were small and reasonable. A little help with rent. A loan for a car repair. Covering dinner when we went out as a family. I never hesitated to help. I understood what it was like to struggle, and I wanted to be there for the people I cared about. But over time, something shifted. The requests became demands. It stopped being, "Can you help?" and turned into, "You should help because you can." My family started dropping hints, constantly reminding me of how lucky I was, how easy my life had become, and how I should give back because it was only fair. But the worst offender? My younger brother. He and I were never close growing up. He was the golden child, spoiled, reckless, and entitled. Our parents let him get away with anything while I had to work for every privilege. When I was balancing school, part-time jobs, and endless responsibilities, he was partying, getting bailed out of trouble, and making excuses for why he could never hold down a job. It always felt like we lived in 2 different worlds. I had to earn everything. He just expected things to be handed to him. So it was no surprise when he called me out of the blue with an entitled request. "Hey, man, so I was thinking. Since you're doing really well, I figured you could help me out with the wedding." At first, I assumed he just needed a little support. Maybe a loan or a contribution towards something reasonable, like the venue or the catering. I wasn't thrilled, but I was willing to consider it. But then he dropped the real bombshell. He didn't just want a little help. He wanted me to pay for the entire wedding. Venue, catering, photographer, music, decor, even the honeymoon. Everything. I was speechless. For a moment, I thought he was joking. But no, he was completely serious. In his mind, it wasn't even a question of if I would do it. It was when. I asked him why he didn't save up for it himself, why he hadn't planned for this huge expense. His response? "Well, you have the money, so why does it matter?" That sentence hit me like a slap in the face. There was no please. No, I know this is a lot to ask. No, I appreciate anything you can do. Just a blunt expectation that because I had worked my ass off for financial security, I somehow owed him this. As if my hard-earned money was his to spend. That was the moment I realized something. He didn't see me as his brother anymore. He saw me as his personal ATM. And when I refused, the real drama began. The moment I told him no, I could hear the shift in his tone. At first, he tried to act surprised, as if the thought of me refusing had never even crossed his mind. He let out a small, disbelieving laugh, like I was joking. But when I stayed silent, waiting for him to realize that I was dead serious, his tone hardened. "Are you kidding me? It's not like you can't afford it," he said. I could feel the anger bubbling under the surface. Not just at him, but at the entitlement in his voice. He wasn't asking me for help, he was demanding it. As if my money wasn't really mine. As if I had no right to say no because, in his mind, I had too much to begin with. I told him the truth. You're an adult. If you want a big wedding, then you should save up for it like everyone else. That was all it took for him to completely lose it. He went off about how I was being selfish, how family is supposed to support each other, how I was hoarding my wealth instead of using it for something that actually mattered. He ranted about how he had always had my back growing up, which was a complete lie, and that if the roles were reversed, he would do it for me. I almost laughed at that last part. If our situations were flipped, I knew for a fact he wouldn't give me a single cent. Hell, I couldn't even count how many times in the past he had borrowed money from me and forgotten to pay it back. But now, when it was his wedding on the line, suddenly, I was the bad guy for not throwing thousands of dollars at him. I told him I wasn't changing my mind. And that's when he brought our parents into it. Not even an hour after our conversation ended, I got a call from my mom. The second I answered, she sighed dramatically, already setting the stage for what was about to be a full-blown guilt trip. "Honey, I just don't understand why you're being so difficult about this. It's your brother's wedding. It's a once-in-a-lifetime event." I knew exactly what was happening. My brother had called her, spun the whole situation to make me look like the villain, and now she was here to pressure me into caving. I told her exactly what I told him, that it wasn't my responsibility to fund his wedding, that he was an adult, and that if he couldn't afford it, he should downsize or wait until he could. But she wasn't having it. She went on about how I had more than enough to spare, how I needed to be more generous, how I should be grateful to be in a position to help family. "It's not like he's asking you to buy him a house. It's just one wedding." As if that made it any better. I asked her why he hadn't saved for it himself. Why, after all these years of being spoiled and bailed out of every mess, was it still everyone else's job to clean up after him? And that's when she said the words that pushed me over the edge. "Well, it's not fair that you have all this money while he's struggling." I almost couldn't believe what I was hearing. Not, "He should be more responsible." Not, "I understand your perspective." Just pure entitlement. I worked for everything I had. He never did. And somehow, in their eyes, that made me selfish. At that point, I knew nothing I said would change their minds. They didn't see it as my money. They saw it as family money, something they had unlimited access to because we were related. So, I shut it down. "I'm not paying for his wedding. This conversation is over." And then I hung up. But it didn't end there. A few days later, I started getting messages from extended family. Some were just checking in to see why I was being so stubborn. Others were more direct, flat out accusing me of being greedy and selfish. My brother, of course, was the one fueling the fire, telling everyone who would listen that I had turned my back on him out of pure spite. The funny thing is, he never once considered making his wedding smaller. He could have had a simple, beautiful ceremony within his budget. But no, he wanted a grand event, a showy, over-the-top wedding that he could brag about. And when he realized he couldn't afford it, instead of adjusting, he expected me to hand him a blank check. Now, most of my family isn't speaking to me. My parents are still upset, my brother is acting like I ruined his life, and I'm getting passive-aggressive messages from cousins and aunts who have never once offered to pay for anything in their lives. But honestly, I don't care. If they think I'm selfish for refusing to bankroll an entitled grown man's wedding, then so be it. At least I know I'm not the one starting my marriage by begging for handouts. Story number 2. AITA for refusing to share my lottery winnings with my family? Winning the lottery is supposed to be life-changing in the best way. For me, it was, but not for the reasons I expected. I had spent years struggling financially. I wasn't broke, but I wasn't comfortable either. I lived paycheck to paycheck, carefully budgeting every dollar, always mindful that one unexpected expense could throw everything into chaos. Then, one day, on a whim, I bought a lottery ticket. I had no expectations, no real hope that anything would come of it. But when I checked the numbers, my entire world changed. I had won a life-altering amount. Not billionaire money, but enough that I would never have to worry about rent, bills, or retirement again. Enough to secure my future, invest, and finally live without fear. At first, I was in complete shock. I barely told anyone, keeping the news to myself while I figured out what to do next. I wanted to be smart about it. I got financial advice, set up accounts, and made a plan to ensure I wouldn't end up like the countless stories of lottery winners who lost everything. But when my family found out, the real nightmare began. At first, it was excitement, overwhelming, suffocating excitement. Everyone was thrilled for me, calling, texting, congratulating me. But that excitement quickly turned into expectations. The requests started subtly. A family member casually mentioning how they were behind on rent. A cousin joking about how I should buy them a new car. My parents talking about how nice it would be to finally have a vacation home. Then, the jokes stopped, and the demands began. I was expected to share. Not asked, expected. They acted like my money wasn't really mine. Like because we were family, it automatically belonged to all of us. I had worked hard my whole life, struggled through tough times without asking for help, and now that I had something good happen to me, I was supposed to hand it over without question. When I said no, the reaction was immediate. First came the guilt trips. I was reminded of every favor anyone had ever done for me, no matter how minor. Every time someone had helped me in the smallest way was now being thrown in my face as proof that I owed them. Then came the accusations. I was called selfish, greedy, ungrateful. Family members who had never once checked in on me before were now acting like I had betrayed them. It didn't matter that I had been careful with my money. That I had put most of it away for investments and security. That I had chosen to use it wisely rather than waste it on flashy things. To them, I was nothing more than a walking bank account. The final straw came when my parents sat me down and told me, point blank, that it was my duty to take care of the family now. Not just them, everyone. They expected me to fund my siblings' futures, pay off my relatives' debts, and ensure that no one ever had to struggle again. It wasn't a request. It was a demand. And when I refused, everything changed. The moment I told them no, the entire mood shifted. At first, there was shock. My parents stared at me as if I had just said something incomprehensible, like they genuinely couldn't process the idea that I wouldn't automatically hand over large chunks of my money to them and the rest of the family. They had already decided in their minds what my role would be, the provider, the savior, the one who fixed everyone's problems. When I didn't fall in line, the disappointment started. They reminded me of everything they had ever done for me. Every meal they had put on the table, every time they had driven me somewhere, every childhood expense they had ever covered, as if that was some kind of loan that I was now expected to repay in full, with interest. They spoke as if I owed them my financial security, as if the money wasn't really mine to keep but something I was holding onto for the family. I tried to explain my reasoning. That I wasn't hoarding my money, that I had plans for it, investments, savings, securing my future so I wouldn't ever have to struggle again. I even said I might help on my own terms, in ways that made sense, without just throwing money around recklessly. But they didn't care about logic. To them, I had money, and that meant I should give it freely. When guilt-tripping didn't work, the real anger came out. Relatives who had barely spoken to me before were suddenly furious. My siblings, who had never shown much interest in my life, were now openly hostile. Family group chats that used to be quiet were now filled with passive-aggressive messages about selfishness, greed, and how I had forgotten where I came from. The worst part was that it wasn't just about money anymore, it became personal. I was accused of being ungrateful, arrogant, and heartless. My character was suddenly under attack, as if winning money had somehow transformed me into a different person, when in reality, they were the ones who had changed. And then, the final blow came. My parents, the people who were supposed to support me, threatened to cut me off completely if I didn't agree to support the family financially. They framed it like an ultimatum: either I'd do my part, or I could consider myself an outsider. I knew, in that moment, that I had already lost them. Because if their love and respect for me were conditional on how much money I was willing to hand over, then they had never really seen me as a person. Just a paycheck. I made my choice. I walked away. I stopped responding to messages, I left the family group chats, and I stopped trying to explain myself. The last conversation I had with my parents ended with my mother telling me she was ashamed of me, and my father saying that if I turned my back on them, I would regret it someday. Maybe I will. Maybe there will be a time when I wish things had gone differently. But at least now, I know the truth. They didn't love me. They loved what I could give them. And I wasn't going to spend my life paying for their approval.